Okay, my computer clock shows 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight virtually for our BOC meeting, the first one of fiscal year 2024. I had asked everyone to, please be courteous. Um, Try not to interrupt speakers. Mute if you've got something in the background that happens. Um, Remind everyone we have the 5 voting members. Keith and Karen are rotating members, and then Eric, Dennis, and myself are the permanent BOC members for this year. This meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website. So I'll take the roll call. Karen?
Here.
Keith?
Here.
Dennis?
Here.
Eric?
Here.
Andy, he's here. Move approval of the agenda. Would someone make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Eric, is there a second?
Second, Keith.
Keith, thank you. Is there any objection? If not, the agenda is approved. So for our new members.
What did Dennis say yes to? Dennis
Sorry.
put the word yes in the comments.
So Sky asked if she could see herself, and I said yes in the comments. I can see Sky. You have to scroll through all the pictures at the top, but I can definitely see Sky.
Oh, I see her now. Sorry,
Yes,
Sky.
I see. Welcome, Sky. Okay, approval of the minutes. Because we have rotating members, and so from meeting to meeting, different people are on the BOC, we generally just do the approval of the minutes by consent. So if somebody had an objection, they could have, sent in comments. But because it's too hard for the new members to know exactly what happened present the last time, we do the minutes by consent. So we already approved the agenda, so we approved the minutes. What I'd like to do is move on to the approval of the agenda for May 25th. Now, this is kind of an unusual situation. We already posted the agenda, we posted the backups, because normally the BOC doesn't meet until after the meeting in May. So this is more of a formality. But the agenda is already posted. It is to start at 8:30, and I checked the website, and it does say 8:30. And so I will ask for approval of the agenda for the May 25th meeting.
So moved.
Eric moved. Is there a second?
I second.
Karen seconded.
Sorry, I was waiting for you guys to speak up. I feel like there's like a order to this.
Is there any objections? I hope not, because we already posted and everything's ready. But hearing none, they're approved. Thank you. Okay, now we can go into where we can actually discuss. So our first work session of the year is June 8th. And if you noticed from our agenda, the very first topic is an update on downtown Columbia from Howard Hughes Corporation. We wanted to try to get this in as soon as possible because with the proposed Lakefront Library and other things, there have been some changes to downtown Columbia. And so Howard Hughes Corporation has volunteered to come and let us know what the new plans are for downtown. Dennis, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Greg Fitchett is definitely anxious to come in and speak with the board. He wanted to come in May. I told him that would not work, but he's anxious to get together with the board.
So we put that on as the first topic for the June because we thought that would be a very great interest to the entire board to see what else is going on and what changes have been made. I will tell you, the board has been following the Downtown Columbia project closely over the years, and we have received a number of briefings. So this is just another in the series of trying to keep the board up to date on what is happening. The second thing you'll notice is we're going to review the Code of Business Conduct and Policies and the policy for reporting violations. So this is our ongoing ethics discussion, which has been ongoing for well over a year. And I think I can speak for Eric and myself. We would really try to like to wrap this up. And so we put this on the June agenda. The lawyers will have reviewed the changes we made, and we'll have some proposals. And so we figured the June work session was probably a good time to try to move this project along and hopefully get it done. Eric, anything you want to add?
Nothing I want to add, but I do want to point out that there's also 4B on the agenda.
Yeah, I was getting to that, but yeah, Dennis's objectives,
So on the reconciliation, is that the ethics policy that we're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, I just didn't see the word ethics in there anywhere, so I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same stuff.
Remember, we renamed it Code.
I don't.
Yeah. It's now the Code of Business Conduct. But you're right. It's those two, 4C and 4D are actually the ethics policies.
Okay.
And Dennis, if you don't mind, our lawyers will be prepared, right? They will have the stuff for us.
Correct.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you. And then lastly, we have on the agenda is the goals and objectives for our president. Each year, the board is supposed to set the goals and objectives. We try to do this early because if we set goals and objectives for the president to meet for fiscal year 24, we'd like to give him or her as much time as possible to meet those. And the longer we delay it, the shorter the time frame is. And sometimes it makes it hard to actually succeed with those goals and objectives. I will tell you that the board did meet in April, and Eric might have some to say about it with Dennis, and came up with some interim goals. And we really would like this board to review those and hopefully approve them or make some minor modifications. Eric, anything you want to add?
Yeah, that pretty sums it up. So we worked with Dennis in April, came up with some interim goals. I imagine that would be the background, but the board will have a chance to look at those goals and make modifications, make edits as the board sees fit. And the goal really is to get these approved sooner than later, because as Andy said, the earlier they're approved, the more time Dennis has to meet those goals.
Now, I will tell you that in general, this is a little unusual. It's because Dennis came on board, fairly recently, and the board had an opportunity to talk with him in April. And instead of trying to do a full-blown evaluation, the board talked about some goals and objectives, which Dennis had also come up with. And so that actually gave us a head start for this year, which I think is really good. And the board will have something to look at. And then, as Eric said, the board can modify them.
So in terms of that, was that a closed meeting that the goals and objectives were discussed in?
Yes, that's why they're temporary. I mean, they're because it was actually an evaluation meeting, and it came up as part of the evaluation.
Okay, just a little bit concerned if we had a closed meeting, drafting goals and objectives, and then now we're discussing it in open session, just in terms of transparency and how that looks, especially related to the closed the closed guidelines.
Yeah. What happened is the meeting was actually closed for two purposes. In fact, Janet is going to send out the minutes of that meeting, which happened April 20th, so the entire board can see it. It was actually the president's evaluation. And as part of the evaluation, we do sometimes talk about goals. And since Dennis had just started, basically, I think a lot of the meeting focused on goals. So we looked at it, and that part of it is can be open. And so we will make sure that what we present in the background information from that meeting is actually open. So it can be discussed in an open meeting.
And
Karen,
generally,
any questions?
and generally speaking, these are goals that come directly from Dennis. So these are his goals that he's presenting to the board.
Right. Mine's more of a just sort of organizationally, having a closed session, discussing items, and not having anyone hear the discussion of those items, and then bringing it into an open session. But I'm fine as long as you all can reconcile it.
Unusual circumstance, right, Eric?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an unusual circumstance. I think it's just the board working with the CEO.
Yeah.
And as part of an evaluation, it's normal for one of the topics we talking about potential goals for the oncoming year, just to start doing some of that brainstorming. So I see that as part of the evaluation process, which an evaluation is closed.
Yeah, our evaluations have always been closed
Cool.
for all our presidents. Karen?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, so Dennis, so your goals they're not finalized. This is still being, you've presented to the board and now it's an opportunity for discussion, or
Yes.
is that, okay.
So any questions on the agenda for the June 8th work session?
I had just wanted to ask broadly how, in terms of topics overall, when the board votes on something, we all agree on something in the board meetings.
Yep.
There are a few items that just seem to disappear at least during my time, that disappear and don't come back again. Like we did a vote on the ethics committee, and we said that we were going to be moving forward with that. Where do those things that the board says we're going to do end up in the drafting of these agendas?
So all that gets recorded in the agenda topics log.
So is that out there currently?
Yes, it should be. In fact, I'll make sure I'll ask Janet to make sure gives everyone a copy of the agenda topics log. So what we do is we carry over anything from the previous year.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't lose anything. And what we like is for people, BOC, everyone on the board to look at that and kind of give us feedback. And generally that is where we draw our topics. Now, every so often there will be I'll say an unusual or quick turnaround, such as Howard Hughes' briefing on the downtown Columbia. And when that happens, we think it's important enough we try to fit it in. But you're right, outside of that, we do try to look at the agenda topics log. And I'll make sure Janet, gives everyone access.
Hey, Andy, I know I'm new. I have another newbie
Sure.
question. So has Dennis had an opportunity also? We're not the only ones adding to the agenda, right? Like Dennis is going to bring us things that we need to review that he sees as well, right? Things he wants to get in front of the board.
Yes, actually what happens is Eric, Dennis, and I will sit down
Okay.
and do drafts. So Dennis gets input into it.
Okay.
Now,
That's what I wanted to make sure.
I will tell you, we make the best guess, and then a month later, something comes up and we have to rearrange things.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that that Dennis has his inputs also, because he'll see things that we don't see. So
Yes.
that's
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And generally, the agendas start with Dennis and staff.
okay.
All right. So is there a motion to approve the agenda for the June 8th work session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Karen. Any discussion? Any opposition?
No, no opposition, but discussion-wise, the reconciliation items are put out there as two separate 40-minute items, but the whole purpose behind them was really to look at reconciling those two documents. So is there, instead of having one, voting on that, and then having the other one, is it better to present both documents in the conversation and then vote on them both?
There is also to reconcile the documents with our current charter and bylaws and existing documents. So I think they should be separate because they are actually separate policies.
Okay, so my understanding was that they were being reconciled to each other. I wasn't aware from the prior board meeting that we were doing that broader reconciliation. So, I still wonder what'll end up happening is if we approve certain items in one, and then we have all the votes to get rid of things or accept changes, so on and so forth. Then we get into the next one. We're going to put ourselves into a reconciliation loop again. Is my concern.
Yeah, I believe, Keith, that both documents have actually been reconciled against each other. I mean, that's what the lawyers, we did keep them separate, but that might be a really good point to discuss at the June work session, saying, hey, let's just put these two together.
Oh, that's true. It's a work session. So, yep, I'm good. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. We just thought it might be easier to do a little bit of the discussion. But the lawyers have both policies and they have reconciled them. All right. The June 22nd meeting. Okay. So I would like to call your attention to what's under the consent agenda. There's the annual report for the advisory committees. I know there's been a couple of questions about advisory committees and are they coming to the board and that. Eric, Dennis, and I talked, and what we thought is, one, we would make sure that they all have reports for the board to see, and then we just put the reports under the consent agenda. And secondly, we will make an offer to each committee. If they wish to come and actually talk to the board, we will schedule them as kind of like as part of like a resident speak out. So instead of having everybody come at the same time, we will offer each committee's chair, send a person or a chair, if they wish, to talk to the board. Any comments on that?
No, I think that's a good idea. I think it's overwhelming when they all come at once. I agree with Sky on that.
Yeah, that's what we thought. It was just way too much. And by making the offer, not every committee will accept it, but once we know, we can schedule them. Sky, does that sound reasonable?
Yes, thank you.
Good. And by the way, Sky, you can talk. You just can't vote, but you can still be part of the discussion. Any of the board members can be part of the discussion. And since I can't see all of you, I got to figure out how to do some. Yeah, it's a little tough sometimes.
In the upper right-hand corner, there's
You're right. I got it. Thank you. Makes it much easier. Now I can see all of you. So if you have any questions or anything. The second thing I wanted to point out is if you you got the exceptions to the excess cash calculation. So for the villages, you have a management contract which tells you how you calculate the excess cash contribution. And when there is a major construction, there's a slightly different formula used. And so one village has asked for an exception to the excess cash calculation. Eric, Dennis, and I talked about it, and we thought it just simply should go on the consent agenda, since we've never turned down an exception, and it does fit within the management contract. So, Eric, Dennis, anything you want to add? No, okay. And then so, technically what we've tried to put down is proposed goals as a vote. for the president, and then the code of business and the reporting violations as a vote. Once again, this depends on our discussion, how we do it at the June work session. If everything goes well, then hopefully we can actually do a vote. And then we added a topic, which was, what can the board of directors do to add value to Columbia? It's kind of like, what is it that the board of directors would like to do this year, in addition to our budget, our strategic plan, and hiring a new president? Because I know several people have expressed interest. And so this is an opportunity for the board to talk. Eric, anything you want to add on that?
No, I think this is almost equivalent to our goals and objectives. So Dennis presents his, and this basically gives us a chance to discuss our goals and objectives as far as what we want to accomplish. The other thing I'll point out is you'll notice a parallel between this agenda and the work session agenda, where the things for discussion on the work session agenda show up on this agenda as board votes, and that's because it really requires 2 meetings to discuss and vote.
Do we really think that all 10 members can limit their discussion to 30 minutes? 30 minutes?
Oh, good
You
question.
don't have to answer that.
Thank you for, I appreciate you bringing that up. I didn't want to be the one, but I don't understand 30 minutes for this, and I don't understand what we're really looking to get out of this. We have a pretty clear understanding of our roles, and we're stepping through that in our training that we're going to be going through. There's strategic planning documents. Really, the goals are not tied to the board. The goals are tied to the CEO and our oversight for the CEO. And this really opens up a can of worms that I'm not entirely sure that we that we want to open up at this juncture, given all of the things that we have on our agenda for the year.
No, good points. I will say this was an opportunity because different board members come with different perspectives and different wants. This was at least an opportunity for them to talk about it, not to say we're going to agree with it or accept it.
Hey, Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt. So I think that like a couple of us, like myself and Sky and Eric, we were all in contested elections this year and had to talk to the people in our villages about what our goals and objectives were.
Right.
So I feel like we have discussed those, but more importantly, we're going to be setting a new strategic plan this year. And that's really where the board can put its stamp on what it wants to do for the future, is when we create that strategic plan. I mean, with staff, obviously, but I think that, so I'm not sure. I mean, if everybody wants to do it, I'll definitely come to, and I'll be prepared, but I'm not sure that it offers any more value after what we've already done over the past couple months.
I will point out that the meeting is slated to end at 9:15. So we do have, if we think this topic would go longer than a half hour, we do have time.
We have time for it, but I mean, one of the things that I would point out to everyone is, I think in this meeting, oh no, that's in the previous meeting that we will have had, Greg Fitchett will have come and presented to the board about the new library space, and maybe it would be better to use that time to allow more residents to speak on that specific topic rather than the board opining. I mean, I'm not saying there's not value in what we think there is. Obviously, we ran for these offices, but it might be good to hear some Columbia residents come and speak about what they think about the new library, since we'll have had a presentation, and how it does or does not benefit the Columbia Association.
So what I'm hearing is maybe an interest that we defer this particular, board discussion, and instead look at, say, more discussion on downtown Columbia, and possibly starting our look at the strategic plan. And I was going to ask Dennis, on the work session in July, sorry, we have a report on the 2019 strategic plan. Would it be possible to do that at the end of June? Kind of like as a kickoff? No? No, Dennis is
So
shaking.
I tried to push it as much as possible, and I was not able to push him further than July. No,
All right.
I've had that discussion with Rick.
Okay. Sounds reasonable. So Keith, Karen, you want to put in instead a topic, discuss further discussion on downtown Columbia?
I mean, yeah, do we want to put out any kind of call to residents who would like to come and say that we're going to extend resident speak out? That would be one of my suggestions. Further discussions on downtown Columbia. I would be in favor of that, yes.
Keith?
Yeah, I like that also, and if we can structure the conversation so that it's we're just getting feedback and doing listening. The board is really just gathering information rather than offering our perspectives on the feedback that's being provided.
I mean, certainly, yeah, we can restructure the agenda so that we have, I'll call it a special resident speak out to talk about, downtown Columbia. We can focus the discussion. We'll ask that discussion be focused solely on downtown Columbia and hear maybe the villages, maybe town center might want to come to us. Right. And talk about, downtown Columbia. But, we could, and we have time, we could probably set aside 60 minutes, if that sounds reasonable. And we will structure it as a community feedback, not for us, but as a community feedback. Dennis, does that make sense?
So I think we should add, if we're going to make a special call out to residents to speak on it, we only have, it looks like 15 minutes for resident speak out. So I think we should extend that at least to 30. And might be 45.
Well, what I'm thinking is let's replace that general resident speak out for this meeting with a special resident speak out solely on downtown Columbia, and let's make it 60 minutes. Does that sound reasonable?
Are we allowed to limit the topics on the speak out? That was something I was wondering about before.
Sort of. So again, people should be allowed to speak out on anything else on the agenda, especially things that we're voting on. So you wouldn't be able to limit it to just downtown Columbia talk, because people should be able to speak out about anything on the agenda.
Eric, what about if the first 15 minutes is just regular resident speak out, but then after that it's specifically for people who came to speak about the library? Are we allowed to do that or no?
I mean, what you could do in the resident speak out is invite people you could make it all one resident speak out and invite people to speak out about the library, and then Janet could just group those people. So when people sign up for resident speak out, they generally put in their topic, so I know ahead of time who's coming and what topic they're speaking on, so it's not a complete surprise. So you could actually group anyone speaking out about the library. You could group those all together. I wouldn't necessarily change the agenda to have a special resident speak out, but you can invite people to talk about to speak out on the library, for example.
Sky, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if you wanted to limit the speak out to only comments on the library, it might be an administrative nightmare because not everybody would get the message, and they would put a topic in their request to speak out, and if it was inappropriate, if it was not about the library, then somebody, maybe Janet, would have to get back in touch with them and tell them they can't speak out on that subject this evening and whatever. So that's a disadvantage for having only one speak out and it limited to the library.
All right, well, we have actually in the past done like a grouping of resident speak outs, a general resident speak out followed by a special topic resident speak out. I mean, we have done that years ago with that. So if I'm getting the sense that we would like to have a discussion, comments from the community in regard to downtown Columbia, Lakefront Library, big thing. But in case somebody wants to talk about something else in downtown Columbia, I think that, should be appropriate. So let's drop the board discussion on what can the CA board do, and instead expand resident speak out with an emphasis on downtown Columbia. But we can still, anybody can speak out on the topics.
Are you making a motion?
I'm asking if somebody would like to make that motion.
I'll move for that.
All right, Karen moved. Is there a second? Keith seconded. All right.
The only discussion, Andy, from my standpoint, is not to drop the CA board directors adding value, not to drop that, but to move that to similar to the way that we discussed the, Dennis's goals and objectives. We can add that to the strategic planning process so that it is a part of that process.
All right. No, that makes sense.
I agree with that.
I do have one question on this motion. And the question I have is, with regard to the library, what can CA actually influence? Because I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Well, influence. If you use the word influence, CA can influence quite a bit, right? That's, given our roles and things in terms of dictate or decide, right, or any of those pieces. I think that's a different conversation as I understand it.
I mean, Dennis sits, if I'm not mistaken, Dennis sits on the Downtown Columbia Partnership Board. Is that right, Dennis? In case I'm muddling it. I mean, the feedback would be helpful, I think,
I think it would also be helpful for the board just to get a sense from people about what might, what their comments and concerns might be. And the library is just one phase. There's going to be more stuff coming, and maybe what we hear will influence how we proceed in the future.
Right.
With things. Yeah. It may not be just focused on this particular library, but given the library, let me think of it. How, if the library goes through, how do we want to interface our property with the library? How do we want to handle what else is coming?
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with this is, it's one thing to have a discussion, but it's quite another thing to have a discussion that leads to some kind of action by the board. And what I'd like to see is making sure that whatever discussion we have regarding downtown Columbia, we follow that up with some kind of action, whether it's testimony to the county council or a resolution or something that at least allows us to start having that influence.
I think that's probably a very good idea, Eric. So we could, taking the feedback that we get, just make a general statement on behalf of the residents.
Yeah, I think you want to hear what the residents say. I want to be careful that for this particular meeting, I don't want the board to end up discussing it. I want us to hear what the community has to say, and then maybe at the next meeting, we discuss those comments or something. But I don't want to turn it into a board discussion. I want to more hear what people want to say to us about downtown, and then we take that information, figure out. Sky, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would suggest also encouraging people to write to the board on this topic, because probably not everybody who wants to speak will have the opportunity that evening, but to solicit written comments as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and we do accept written comments. And then also, I'd encourage each member to go back to your village board and let them know about this, because they can get the word out too. It doesn't have to be us always. We want the better the word, the more we get out, the better it is.
So one thing to keep in mind, if this is going to lead to a vote, is the next couple of meetings looking ahead on the schedule are pretty packed.
Yeah.
So the question is, how are we going to squeeze some kind of action into the next two, into at least one of the next two meetings beyond this?
It made me a little bit nervous when we started going down the path of determining some type of action or statement that we need to make, because the folks who come to Resident Speak Out may not be entirely representative of all the feedback that may be out there, and we may not have all of the information available. We're hoping that we have a good amount of information, but if we're definitively going to be providing something, I get a little bit worried that we're going to, head down a path that we're not necessarily going to be fully prepared for in terms of, writing a statement like that.
I think part of it too is we really have to hear what the people say, and then figure out where to go from there. And perhaps the immediate meeting after that isn't the right time, because if you want written comments and you want to really hear what the residents have to say, and you want to think about what the residents have to say, we may want to summarize it all for the board, and not jump immediately into, a discussion or a vote. We may want to think about it and give people a chance.
I'd like to, if I could just jump in here.
Sure, Dennis.
Jump in for a second and say that Howard Hughes is going to come to CA for an easement request, not associated with the library, but the continuing development of the lakefront area kind of hinges on that jug handle interchange. And so there is some leverage that CA has, which we have used in the past. For instance, on Lakefront North, we requested that boardwalk that connects that area to the existing lakefront or the Lake Kit Loop. So there may be something we'll see during the lakefront update that speaks to CA or to the residents that we want to make sure we get added in. It's an opportunity for us to have some influence.
And that would be a really good time to hold like the board discussion if we have an easement request in front of us about downtown Columbia. And then that's when you take in, here's what we heard from the residents, here's what we think, and then you can factor that all into the easement and you actually have something to actually vote on.
Do you know when that easement request would come in? Because I don't see it on any of the agendas, and I'm not quite sure where we'd fit it.
It wants to come in July. That's where it wants to come in.
Janet, did you have anything? Okay, let's vote on the June meeting agenda, and then we'll get into July. So the change we made was to hold off on the board discussion on, what can the board do in terms of value for Columbia, and we'll add that to actually part of the strategic plan process. And then we will have an hour-long resident speak out with a focus on downtown Columbia, but people can talk to us whatever they want. Make sense?
The hour-long resident speak out, so it's a 15-minute resident speak out with 45 minutes added for anyone who wants to speak about the library, right?
Downtown Columbia. I want to speak about downtown Columbia.
Downtown Columbia.
And you know what? If we only get 5 residents, and then we won't be spending an hour.
Right. I just want to make sure that we're not going to get an hour's worth of everything that is out there versus, again, 15 minutes of resident speak out and then 45 minutes of downtown Columbia.
Downtown Columbia. Yeah. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
All right. Is there a motion to approve that agenda for the June meeting? Keith moved. Dennis seconded. Okay. Any objections?
Just a question. Does that get rid of item 7?
Yes. because we're going to put that with the strategic plan process when we get to the strategic plan process, which actually starts in July. All right. So look at the July 13th work session.
I
Now-
don't, at what point, in terms of the agendas, is it, have we contemplated moving president's report or other reports up to the top of the meeting before residents speak out, so that there, topics of interest can be discussed when everyone is there? And then we move into resident speak out. I didn't want to just keep going with the agendas without asking at some point here. We typically don't end up going into much depth on the president's report, and there's usually one or two or three, key things that we might want to highlight.
Yeah, historically, we have put items first, like resident speak out or things of interest to the community, or any guest speakers, before we get into what I'll say is more the board, staff, administrative type stuff. We've just done that historically, and that's why you see usually the dashboard, the financial reports come later in the meeting, because we're here and staff's here. But that's not to say we can't change the order. We have changed the order in meetings before, but historically, that's what we've
I'm
done.
fine moving on. I just wanted to bring it up in terms of the big topics that community members might want to know about that are on that that may be on that report. So I'm good though.
Well, Eric, Karen, any thoughts? I mean,
I prefer to keep the agenda with the order we usually do it. People are generally expecting that order, and also allows residents to at least have some concept of when they'll be speaking. If the resident speak out happens later, then they have less and less notice of when they're going to be speaking. So I prefer to keep basically the residents first, so they know when they're speaking, and then any guest speakers next. So that the people that are guests are speaking first, and so they can leave if they feel like it after they speak, and they've got more consistency.
Karen, anything to?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't see any need to change that. And then they can run home and watch us on YouTube.
Because they all want to go do that, right?
Actually, I'm amazed at the number of people who actually watch us. Not necessarily the day of our meeting, but they will watch us on their schedule. It's amazing how many feedbacks I get from people who say, "Oh, I watched your meeting, while I was doing something." It's like, oh, okay, hey, people are watching.
No, I think people are much more involved than we sometimes realize.
Yeah.
So,
And
it looks like Janet has her hand up.
Janet?
Dennis, if I've got it up, I don't know how I've got it up.
Okay, never mind.
So
All right.
I've just kind of been following everything. I don't have any comments at this point.
All right, thanks, Janet. All right, July 13th. So two things I wanted to kind of highlight. One is the report on the 2019 strategic plan. As Dennis alluded, this was the soonest he could reasonably get it on ready for the agenda, but that's kind of like sets the background. It tells us, how things went with the 2019 plan in preparation for our discussing the update of the plan. And the second thing is the information only session, community engagement. It's to try to bring the board up on some key activities that the organization is undertaking. And community engagement includes the web and communication and other things. So Dennis thought this was something that would be very good to just kind of let the board know what the organization is doing in that area. Since it is a major project actually for the organization. Dennis, anything you want to add?
As I look at the schedule, I'm wondering, it doesn't look, I don't think 30 minutes is enough for the strategic plan retrospective.
Okay.
As I look at this, Susan can speak to it. I'm wondering if the budget schedule can be information only, no discussion. And that's usually not, there's not a lot on that. Really.
Well,
30 minutes on 4D does not seem like that.
I think though the board is going to have to approve the budget schedule at the July meeting. Now we could put it on the consent agenda for approval if there's, if that's okay with the board.
Just on some of these items, why does the board have to approve the budget schedule versus staff communicating what it's going to look like? Just wondering, is that written somewhere or is that just what we've done?
It's what we've done in the past.
Okay.
Various past boards have been interested in the budget schedule, perhaps more than current boards have been. And so historically, we have simply brought the budget schedule to the board. Now, I will tell you, in the past, there have been other things. The budget schedule was incorporated into some other activities, like we used to set the annual charge at that meeting to kind of give staff guidance. And we have pared things back to where it's just the budget schedule. Susan, is there anything you want to add? I mean, I think this time it's just the budget schedule, right?
Yeah, that's right. We had gotten a lot of feedback that the board didn't want to be locked into the annual charge rate and cap this early in the process. So we've pushed that out. So it's, and Annie's exactly right. It's just in front of the board because previous boards wanted it so. So it's up to you all. That's as far as the budget schedule goes.
I will say that the budget schedule is also the budget process. So if the board wants to add something to the process or change something in the process, this would be the time to do so. Whereas if it's just in the consent agenda, then that doesn't really give the board any opportunity to modify the process.
So this is
What
looking
about
at July 13th, which is a work session, not a vote, correct?
Mhm.
So my thought, I agree with Keith. I don't think the board needs to. Now, I think we could provide a written copy and the staff could report it out. But I'm not sure it needs to be a topic for discussion. It's pretty fulsome.
Yeah.
Grows, it's gotten more community members involved every year.
I mean, what we could do is,
the schedule.
as Keith suggested, is we could put it down under questions only. Okay, so that the board gets to see the schedule and can ask whatever questions it has. And then in the next meeting, we'll actually do a vote on it. So if the board would like to modify it, I don't think it requires a huge amount of discussion. But if you put it on questions only, then board members can ask questions about it. So if anybody does have, some comments or concerns or want some additional information, you get to see it. Does that make sense? I mean, what do you think, Keith?
Oh, I'm generally fine. What I wonder about on some of the things that we say we need to vote on, the only reason I'm asking those questions is anytime we say that we're going to be discussing and voting on someone, everyone feels the need to add 2 cents or to talk about, what's on the topic. Where if it were just a board education session saying, here's what we're doing, here's how the community is getting involved, here's what the board expectations are around this process, and it's just education, I'd prefer for it to be that, unless people really feel like they want to end up discussing. And I know it's been a short amount of time, but I haven't seen a lot of topics where, board members just, are silent and approve them. Usually there's a lot of discussion that ends up ensuing, and we spend more time than we anticipated. That's all.
Eric, what do you?
I mean, one of the things that would probably be discussed, and I know board members like to discuss, is when the annual charge gets approved and how that fits into the general process. I know at one point we did it really early, at one point we did it really late, at one point we did it sort of in the middle-ish. So that could be a reason to have a discussion to just figure out when the annual charge should be fixed by the board.
So my question, I looked at that last year, and I really just wondered. Typically in budgets, the budgets are all put together by staff, and then a recommendation comes from staff regarding whether they want to increase the charge or keep the charge flat or lower the charge or anything along those lines. But it's based upon all the feedback that's provided along the way. So the idea of taking bits and pieces and deciding them before a budget is finalized, it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse, and it seems like we should just go ahead and outline what it is that we want to do, and the staff feels is appropriate, and then we vote on everything at that point in whatever order. I knew it was broken down, Eric, when you had done it to categorize each piece, and I appreciated that just so that folks could be clear. But it seems like we should wrap all that up. And I don't know, Dennis or Susan, what you think about that, but it would seem odd to me to have that be a piece that's pulled out of the process.
So I'd say really quickly that we discuss the annual charge every year, and it has not changed for as long as I remember. The odds of it going up, I think, are less than zero. Right? We're not going to raise the annual charge. There might be some pressure at some point in time as assessments continue to go property. There might be some push in the future to lower it. But the fact of the matter is the annual charge is pretty much stuck where it is, I think, for the indefinite future. Susan?
So we actually increased the cap, I think, in 2017. That's the most recent time that it's been changed. Either component's been changed by the board. So I'm not sure I understood what you were saying, Keith. I agree that it can be all done at one time, and I'm happy to lay that out at when it makes sense for staff to meet reasonable deadlines and then time horizons for the board to discuss it with the community and then consider and vote. So we would ask probably that you would establish at least the guidance for the budget at the November meeting in order for us to develop a draft and produce it for you in January, mid-January for consideration and voting. But the votes on the budget, including, and the annual charge the annual charge has to be voted on, or we put it separately because the deed says it needs to be approved by the board every year. So that does need to be called out at least separately at some point, but it can be part of that whole process.
I'll also point out, I think a couple years ago, we actually had budget scenarios that the board could choose between. The board worked with staff to create several budget scenarios that the board actually deliberated over even before the actual formal budget was created.
And we did that once, and it didn't really work very well. But I wouldn't be proposing that again for this year personally.
Well, based on our conversation, I would suggest that we do simply move the budget schedule down to questions only, in a sense that the board does need to be informed of what the budget schedule is. And that does free 20 minutes, which we can add to the strategic plan.
So you're gonna move it down under number 6?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be 6A or B, one of the two. I mean, might make it first, might make it second. That way we do inform the board, and if anybody has any questions, you can ask, just like pre-filed state and county legislation. That's a board requirement that we address that. We put 5 minutes because there generally isn't any state legislation at the July meeting. I mean, it's just not, and very, very few council bills because the county council's ready to head out on vacation in August. So, it's there, but generally in July, there's not a whole lot on it because there's just not a lot being done. All right, so what if we do that? What if we move, the budget schedule down under questions only, and we take that 20 minutes and add it to the strategic plan item, make that 50 minutes.
I think that's a good idea.
All right, is there a motion to approve that agenda?
So can I make a comment?
Yes.
So we did not address the Howard Hughes easement request, which we don't have room on the agenda for. I'm not suggesting, but I can talk to Ray and see if we can push that to September, till September, and see what he says.
The other thing too is you talk to Greg, see what the schedule is, and then we can look at a possible minor adjustment to the schedule to fit it in. I mean, because one thing we all have to understand is when you're planning 3 months out, it is very possible that things will happen by the third month that we just have to tweak the agenda. The first month it's easy, what to do. The second month, by the time you get to the third month, you're looking into the future, and just sometimes things happen that you didn't.
I got a question. Does 4B and C really need to be 45 minutes each? I mean, could those be, say, 30 minutes each, and that would give you 30 minutes for the easement?
Well, that's what I was thinking. If we had to, if the easement came in, and I will tell people, it isn't simply that somebody asked for an easement. Okay, staff has to do the homework. They have to evaluate the easement and get ready to talk to it for the board. So part of the question is will staff be able to address the easement in that time frame? And that's why I rely on Dennis, because there's no sense of putting on the agenda.
So right now, the application has not been submitted, so it's definitely not technically complete.
Yeah.
So I suspect it would be by this date, but if I guess we could hold it in the back of our minds as it is a couple months out.
Yeah, my preference would be is we just hold it, knowing that if the easement comes in and staff can process it, we can add it on the agenda, give it 30 minutes by taking 15 minutes from each of the committee discussions. That's something we can do to tweak the agenda. But I don't want to put it in without, I'll say, a firmer grasp that staff can adequately review it for the board, because I don't want it to go before the board unless staff has reviewed it and can answer the board questions.
Okay.
Does that make sense to the rest of the BOC? All right, well, Karen had moved to approve that modified agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Keith. All right, any discussion, any further discussion? If not, any opposition to?
Well, the further discussion was just on the strategic committee charter and the oversight committee charter. That was one of the items that that we discussed in the prior board meeting, and I think what I'm looking for is a mechanism. And Dennis, I guess I'm looking your way, is that when the board approves something and there's an expectation around execution, that we need to bring that back in some fashion, because many of us approved the strategic committee and the oversight committee charter with the understanding that we had to approve it at the end of the prior fiscal year in order to start filling those positions at the very beginning of the new year, so that we could get working immediately. And there really wasn't any board feedback around that discussion decision that was made. And I've just seen that happen at least 2 or 3 times now, where a decision was made by the board, and then we didn't take action. We didn't hear about what happened with it. So we need some mechanism, Andy, Eric, Dennis, to ensure that when things get voted on, they're logged someplace, and then there's an expectation of either communication back to the board immediately that it's not going to happen, or that we've scheduled a date.
That's, I think, where the board topics log comes in.
Dennis, I mean, for this agenda, are you prepared? I mean, will you be prepared to talk about these two? Because, you did
Yes.
raise a lot of questions that have to be addressed.
And we're not going to be ready any sooner than September to stand these committees up, technically. So in terms of getting.
I'm fine with understanding that. That wasn't the topic. It's just more that the board votes and makes a decision on something, and then there's a number of times where it just disappears into wherever, and then we never hear what the reasoning. So in this case, you don't have the resources to stand it up, so on and so forth. That's fine, but if I hadn't asked that, I don't know that there was a mechanism to bring it back, to understand that something that the board voted on to have implemented immediately at the beginning of the next fiscal year was not going to happen. It would be kind of like the code charter. If we decided all of a sudden that we weren't going to get anything done by the end of June, I would expect that the board should know that that's going to happen. So I don't know what the mechanism for that, but it's not working right now from what I can see.
Sky, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have the same opinions as Keith. My background was in meetings to have action items, and then with a due date, and at the next meeting have a review of the action items and their status, whether they're closed or needed an extension. And is that what you're kind of getting at, Keith?
Yeah, whatever that mechanism is that again, Andy, Eric, and Dennis decide. I just want to make sure, and it's not the board topics log in my opinion, because it's very different than an item that we want to bring up for discussion. These are board actions that we've said we expect, and we've been told that this is the way it's going to behave, and we need to be communicated as such. So if it's a standing item on the agenda, or something like that, I just want to make sure that we get feedback immediately about things that are either not going to happen or not going to happen for any number of perfectly good reasons. I just want I want the board to be in the know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can tell you from on Brown Village Board, every meeting, not work session, but every meeting, they do a review. It's kind of like a real quick review of the action items just to see what the status is. And if you think about it, you can just do that as a written report under like questions only, just like a very quick status report. Here are the actions, and here's where we may see some problems, or here's like, oh yeah, it's being worked on. And you just do that under a questions only, but let Eric, Dennis, and I think about that. But that's my initial thought is something like that sounds good. And we simply put it under, questions only at the meeting. Just do it once a month, but it's kind of like a review of the action items.
Thank you.
Okay, so I didn't hear any objection, so I'll consider the July 13th work session agenda approved. And we move on to the July meeting. Here we are. This is so I want to point out for the July meeting, one of the important items, is under financial reports. It's the audited financials. So the audited financials are the report from the independent auditors, on CA's, fiscal year for 2023. Now, the detailed discussion with the auditors actually occurs at the audit committee, which will be held a couple days before, and all board members are invited to that meeting. At the audit committee, the auditors are right there. The committee will go into closed session actually with auditors and ask questions and things like that. So it's a very good feedback. But the board will see, the audited financials and the fourth quarter financial report. And so I just want to call that to your attention. That's important that it be on the July meeting agenda. So the board is made aware of those. Hopefully, we will get a clean opinion as we have had in the last couple of years. And I'm expecting we will get a clean opinion, but we have new auditors this year. I will tell you, we have a brand new set of auditors. So this is their first year. We change auditors every 5 years, I think, or 10 years. I can't remember. But every so often we change auditors just to kind of refresh and get a new perspective. And then the other thing on there is the dashboard. The dashboard is a quarterly report presented to the board, kind of give you an overview of where things stand in terms of, I'll say, programs and services, mostly related to our sports and fitness facilities, but slowly integrating other into it. And it's an extensive report. And it's one of the things that the board should pay attention to in terms of oversight for the organization. And I will tell you that in the dashboard, there have been certain metrics that the board has established, which is why you see them in the dashboard. It's not that staff wanted those. Those are the metrics the board said report back to us. And so staff reports back to us on those metrics.
Are there any, just about that, are there any position papers that are going to be included in that conversation, in the sense that these are decisions that that were made about how we are choosing to move forward? One thing that came to mind the other day is the number of CA residents versus non-residents that are using various facilities. Is our position being brought with that dashboard for discussion?
Susan, Dennis, any comments?
Not really. So most of those types of discussions have typically been in the budget process, since they have such a correlation to the budget and the financial results of the organization. So we were not planning on providing any position papers, but we could provide some backup if you like. It would be, we could do what we can. That's a tough meeting because we are in the middle of the audit. So
I thought you gave the answer. It's going to be part of the budget process. So I'll look to that time frame to better understand it. Thank you.
I think the dashboard in my mind, and Dennis and Susan can correct me, is more kind of like an ongoing status of what's going on. It's not like we have a problem or here's a statistic or position paper. It's more like here's what's actually happening, and here's kind of the feedback we're getting from some of our members, as well as the feedback on the metrics that the board asked the staff to report on.
Just background on that. When you have new board members who are coming onto the board and seeing a dashboard, there are a number of questions that might pop up from board members at that time that might be easily addressed if they had a position paper. So coming out of the budgeting process, it would probably be handy for us to collect some of that information so that in the next cycle, we can just literally give someone something that says, here are some of the big topics that get discussed every single year. Let's just go ahead and frame that for you so that you can get caught up a little bit quicker.
okay.
Well, one thing we might want to discuss is whether or not the metrics still make sense, whether or not we want to add metrics or take away metrics.
Yep.
Because those metrics were established quite a while ago.
Yep. And I would say for a quick a kind of synopsis of the positions or the guiding sort of principles for the budget, and thus for some of those dashboard metrics would be the transmittal letter in the budget document is kind of summarizes the key points there, if that's helpful.
But Eric, raises a really good point. Sometimes the board will make a decision, and then we just carry it through, but we never go back and 10 years later decide, is this really something we need to report on? Is this really something we should be doing? Eric's right. We should at some point look at those metrics and determine whether they still have value to the board. Or maybe they might still be kind of like, I'll say, valuable, but perhaps there's a metric that's even more important to the board than what we have. But that's got to be a board decision. That's got to be something the board thinks about and talks about. Staff will report on whatever metric the board tells them to report on.
And if I may, that might be a good project for the committee structure for, as you move forward in that.
Yeah. All right. What else about the agenda?
Can we talk about number 5?
Sure. Yeah.
Is that a presentation? What is Scott Petrie going to do for 45 minutes?
So he's probably got 50 minutes of presentation, and I'm sure the board has 30 minutes of questions, if not more.
Yeah. So part of
know specifically what he wants to share?
No, not at this time.
Eric, Dennis, and I talked about this. This is a topic of great interest, and so we thought it would be good to bring in WSSI. We did it last October, or maybe we need to do it more often, just to kind of stay up on the process, and also it gives the board an opportunity to talk to WSSI. And once again, it was kind of like, you're laying out everything to say, I think we could fit it in the July timeframe. And this is how it ended up at the July meeting, because we were tossing things around.
I think it's important. I'm glad it's on the agenda.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Karen second. Keith moved, Karen seconded.
You
All
guys
right.
should just let the rotating members be the voters.
Along with the questions around this, along with that update, are we going to be getting an update from the Watershed Committee with regard to the information that they were reviewing? I don't know what that mechanism is to get information back that way. I just want to sort of bring it all together so that
Sure.
we're hearing things.
I'll let Dennis think about that.
I'll reach out to the Watershed Committee.
Yeah, because that could just be part of his report.
Be a good opportunity to test the new not committee structure, but the committee reporting system.
Yeah.
What system is that?
All right. So, any objection to
I'm
the
serious.
agenda for July?
I just want to know what system is that, Eric, you were talking about?
Oh, when we at the beginning of the meeting where we stated that we're not having all the committees report at once, but basically either inviting them or when they want to come to present.
Okay, already.
That's what we discussed at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay. Yep. No, I'm good.
But I will say that in particular, since we, the board, asked the Water Committee to do something, it's on the list of, we are expecting a response from the Watershed Committee, but we don't know exactly when yet. But we will get a response. It's one of those, as you said, Keith, action items that we just have to track. And now Dennis knows about it and reminded him. So, All right. Any objection then to the July? Hearing none is approved. All right. Pretty much this is the BOC meeting for right now. It's the first one. I want to thank you all for coming and participating actively. And Sky, thank you for attending. You know, as I said, all directors are invited to attend. You can, you know, even if you're not the voting members, you know, you can attend and you can participate in the discussion. You can raise items. But thank you. And if there is no objection, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. And 8:15, not bad. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.